The salt spray off the coast of Oregon stung Lieutenant Sarah Voss's face as she positioned herself at the edge of the training platform, 30 feet above the churning Pacific. The morning fog clung to the cliffs like smoke, but her vision cut through it with the precision of a blade. Below, her SEAL team waited in formation, 8 of the most elite warriors the Navy had ever produced, their eyes locked on her every movement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Voss raised her gloved hand, fingers spread against the gray dawn sky. The wind howled across Razor Point Naval Base, carrying the sharp scent of seaweed and diesel fuel from the harbor. Her team knew the drill: explosive breach, tactical descent, hostage extraction in under 4 minutes. They'd run this scenario dozens of times, but today felt different. Today, the brass was watching from the observation deck, clipboards in hand, careers hanging in the balance. She was 28, the youngest female SEAL team leader in naval special warfare history. The weight of that title pressed against her shoulders like invisible armor. Every mission was a test. Every decision scrutinized. Every success measured against the failures they expected from her. But Lieutenant Sarah Voss had never given them a reason to doubt. Her record was flawless: 17 successful operations, 0 casualties, a reputation that preceded her into every briefing room and barracks. The men below trusted her without question. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, her second in command, gave her a subtle nod. His weathered face showed no emotion, but she'd seen that look before. Confidence, respect earned, through blood and sweat on missions that would never make the headlines. Petty Officer Tommy Reeves checked his gear one final time. The kid from Nebraska who'd followed her through hell in Syria, and came back asking for more. But what happened next on that Oregon coastline would change everything. Because after this, no one at Razor Point Naval Base would ever question what happens when you try to break a Navy SEAL who refuses to kneel. Now, before we show you how one shattered kneecap became the most inspiring comeback in military history, hit that like button and tell us in the comments what you think true strength really means. Because what you're about to witness will redefine everything you thought you knew about rising from the ground up. Voss single quotes S fingers closed into a fist, the signal for descent. The team moved like water, flowing over the platform's edge in perfect synchronization. Rappelling ropes sang against metal as 8 bodies dropped toward the mock facility below. The scenario was simple on paper. Terrorist cell holding 3 hostages in a coastal bunker. Extract the civilians, neutralize the threats, exfiltrate to the rendezvous point. She followed her team down, boots hitting the concrete with a whisper. The facility stretched before them, a maze of corridors and rooms designed to simulate every nightmare a SEAL might face. Motion sensors tracked their progress while hidden cameras recorded every breath, every decision, every split-second choice that separated the living from the dead. The first breach went flawlessly. Explosive charges blew the main entrance in a shower of concrete and smoke. Morrison led the charge through the gap, rifle raised, clearing corners with the methodical precision of a surgeon. Voss followed, her weapon tracking left as the team flowed through the building like a deadly tide. Room by room, they advanced. The mock terrorists' fellow SEALs playing the opposition fought back with rubber bullets and flashbang grenades. Paint splattered against walls where live rounds would have drawn blood. The acrid smell of smoke filled the narrow hallways as the team pressed deeper into the facility. Hostage room Alpha was clear. 2 civilians, actually training dummies, equipped with sensors, waited in the second target room. Reeves and Morrison secured the packages while Voss held the corridor, her eyes scanning for movement in the shadows. The mission clock on her wrist showed 3 minutes, 40 seconds. They were ahead of schedule, moving with the kind of fluid perfection that made other units stop and stare during training exercises. The 3rd hostage was supposed to be in the basement. Intelligence indicated a single guard, minimal resistance. Standard extraction protocol called for a two-man team to secure the target while the others held the perimeter. But as Voss approached the basement stairs, something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, the shadows too deep. She'd learned to trust those instincts. They'd saved her life in Kandahar when an IED was buried where it shouldn't have been. They'd warned her about the sniper in Damascus who'd been tracking her team for 3 blocks. Now standing at the top of those concrete steps, every nerve in her body screamed danger. Behind her, Morrison waited for orders. The mission parameters were clear, the timeline established. 3 minutes and counting to complete the extraction. But leadership meant making the hard calls, even when they went against the script. Especially when they went against the script. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Voss made her choice. She would take point, clear the basement herself, and secure the final hostage. It was a calculated risk, the kind of decision that separated good leaders from great ones. Her team trusted her judgment because she'd never led them wrong. The stairs stretched down into darkness, each step echoing off concrete walls. Her rifle's tactical light cut through the gloom, revealing empty corners and abandoned equipment. The basement opened into a wide room, storage containers stacked along the walls like metallic monoliths. She moved forward, weapon ready, eyes scanning for the hostage location. The silence pressed against her eardrums like deep water. Then she saw a figure huddled behind a container in the far corner. The final target, but as she approached, the world exploded into chaos. But before we show you exactly how that basement explosion changed everything, how 2 men's jealousy became 1 woman's greatest test, and how the Navy learned that breaking a SEAL's body doesn't break a SEAL's spirit, we need you to do something. Hit that like button right now. Seriously, stop what you're doing and smash that like. Because what you're about to witness isn't just another comeback story. This is about what happens when the very people sworn to have your back decide to stab you in it instead. And the response? Well, let's just say Lynch and Nash had no idea what they were about to unleash. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Someone who was supposed to be on your team? Because Sarah Voss is about to show us all what real strength looks like when it comes from the deepest, darkest place of betrayal. And here's the thing, what happens next in that basement is going to make you question everything you think you know about recovery, about justice, and about what it truly means to refuse to stay down. We're talking about a woman who will literally redefine what the Navy considers possible. A woman who will take the worst thing that ever happened to her and turn it into the most powerful weapon she's ever wielded. So if you're ready to see how Lieutenant Sarah Voss turned a shattered kneecap into the most legendary comeback in SEAL history, stick around. Because trust us, you've never seen anything like what's coming next. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on. Because next week, we're bringing you the story of the pilot who was told she'd never fly again, and then broke every aviation record in the book. But first, let's get back to that basement in Oregon, where 2 traitors were about to learn that some mistakes you can never take back. The countdown on Sarah's mission clock read 2 minutes. 30 seconds as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement stretched before Voss like a concrete tomb, dimly lit by fluorescent strips that cast harsh shadows between towering storage containers. Her tactical light swept across the space in precise arcs, illuminating corners where mock terrorists might hide, scanning for the final hostage that would complete their mission. The air down here felt heavier, thick with the smell of concrete dust and diesel fuel from the generators humming somewhere in the darkness. Her boots made soft whispers against the polished floor as she advanced, rifle at the ready. The mission clock on her wrist showed 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Still ahead of schedule, still moving with the fluid precision that had made her team legendary among naval special warfare units. Above her, She could hear the muffled voices of her men securing the perimeter, their boots creating a steady rhythm against the upper floor. The hostage was supposed to be in the far corner, behind a cluster of containers marked with hazmat, symbols part of the elaborate scenario designed to test every aspect of their training. Voss had run this drill before, knew exactly where to look, exactly how to approach. She moved with practiced efficiency, each step calculated to minimize exposure while maintaining clear sight lines. Behind the containers, she found what she was looking for, a figure huddled against the wall, hands zip-tied behind their back, a hood over their head. Another training dummy, but this one equipped with motion sensors that would register successful extraction. Standard protocol called for her to kneel beside the target, check for booby traps, then signal for extraction support that she approached the final few steps, weapon lowered but ready. The concrete beneath her feet was unmarked, clean, showing no signs of disturbance. Her instincts, honed through 17 successful missions, detected nothing unusual. No tripwires, no pressure plates, no indication that anything waited beyond a routine training exercise. Voss knelt. The world exploded. The shaped charge detonated with surgical precision. Designed not to kill but to maim, not to destroy completely, but to break specifically. Lynch and Nash had calculated every variable, the exact force needed, the precise angle of impact, the perfect positioning to ensure maximum damage to her right knee, while minimizing fatal injury. The explosion lifted her off the ground and slammed her against the concrete wall with bone-crushing force. Her right kneecap disintegrated in an instant, shattered into fragments that tore through muscle and tendon like shrapnel. The joint collapsed inward, bone splintering, ligaments snapping like overstressed cables. The pain didn't come immediately. Shock built a barrier around her nervous system, protecting her mind from the full reality of what had just happened. For several seconds, she simply lay against the wall, ears ringing, vision swimming with bright spots that danced like fireflies in the sudden silence. Then her training kicked in. Even broken, even bleeding, her mind defaulted to battlefield assessment. Threat status, unknown. Injury report, severe trauma, lower right extremity. Mission status, compromised. She tried to push herself upright, tried to regain her footing, but her right leg simply wouldn't respond. Looking down, she saw why. Her knee had been obliterated. What remained barely resembled a joint anymore, just mangled flesh and shattered bone held together by torn fabric and willpower. Blood soaked through her fatigues, spreading in a dark stain that grew wider with each heartbeat. The tactical gear on her right leg hung at an impossible angle, no longer following the architecture of human anatomy down above. The sound of boots thundered against concrete. Her team had heard the explosion, was already moving to her position. But even through the haze of shock and pain, Voss noticed something wrong with their response time. Too slow, too hesitant. As if some of them had been expecting the blast, Morrison's voice echoed down the stairwell. "Base, we have an explosion in the basement level. Medical emergency, need immediate evac." The first faces to appear at the top of the stairs belonged to Lynch and Nash. Their expressions showed exactly the right amount of shock and concern, perfectly calibrated to appear genuine to anyone who didn't know better. But Voss had spent years reading faces in life or death situations, and something in their eyes, a flicker of satisfaction quickly hidden behind manufactured worry, told her everything she needed to know. They had done this. Her own men, her own team. The realization hit harder than the explosion itself. The physical pain was manageable. She'd been trained to function through injury, to compartmentalize trauma until the mission was complete. But betrayal was different. Betrayal cut deeper than shrapnel, wounded parts of the soul that no medic could heal. Morrison reached her first, sliding down the stairs with practiced urgency. His face went white when he saw the damage, but his hands moved with steady professionalism, applying pressure to slow the bleeding, checking for additional injuries. Jesus, Sarah, what happened down here? She met his eyes and saw genuine shock, real concern. Morrison hadn't known. Neither had Reeves or the others. She could see it in their faces as they gathered around her broken form. The betrayal had come from just two men, two cowards who had orchestrated this moment while their brothers remained ignorant. Equipment malfunction, she managed to say through gritted teeth. The lie came automatically, protecting the team's integrity even as her world collapsed around her. But her eyes found Lynch and Nash among the faces, and she let them see that she knew. Let them understand that their secret wasn't as safe as they thought. The medics arrived within minutes, their professional efficiency a blur of tourniquets and morphine, backboards, and radio chatter. As they worked to stabilize her shattered leg, Voss heard fragments of conversation floating above her like pieces of a puzzle she was too damaged to solve. Never seen an explosive malfunction like this. Double quotes. Surgical precision. Almost like it was designed to. Investigation will determine the cause. Lynch stepped forward as they prepared to load her onto the stretcher. Ma'am, the whole team's behind you. Whatever you need for recovery, we're here. The words were perfectly chosen, exactly what a concerned teammate should say. But Voss heard the hidden message underneath. We did this to you. And there's nothing you can do about it. As the stretcher lifted her toward the ambulance, she caught one final glimpse of the basement where her career had just ended. The concrete floor was scarred with blast marks, stained with her blood, marked forever as the place where Lieutenant Sarah Voss learned that sometimes the greatest enemy comes from within your own ranks. But what Lynch and Nash didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly comprehend as they watched their handiwork being carried away, was that they hadn't broken her. They'd only revealed what she was truly made of. And that revelation would prove to be the biggest mistake of their lives. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the sirens began their wail toward the naval hospital. Behind them, Razor Point Naval Base continued its routines, unaware that two men had just unleashed something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. A Navy SEAL with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The fluorescent lights in the naval hospital never stopped humming. Day melted into night without distinction, marked only by the changing shifts of nurses whose footsteps echoed down sterile corridors like a countdown to nowhere. Lieutenant Sarah Voss lay motionless in bed 7 of the orthopedic wing, her right leg suspended in a complex web of metal and wire that looked more like medieval torture than modern medicine. The surgeons had worked for 8 hours straight, trying to reconstruct what Lynch and Nash had destroyed. Dr. Patricia Wells, the chief orthopedic surgeon, had seen combat injuries before: IEDs in Afghanistan, helicopter crashes in Iraq, but even she had been shaken by the surgical precision of the damage. It's like someone designed this injury, she'd confided to her resident, calculated to destroy maximum function with minimal chance of repair. 3 days after the explosion, Dr. Wells entered Voss's room, carrying a clipboard and the weight of devastating news. She pulled up a chair beside the bed, her expression professionally composed, but her eyes betraying the difficulty of what she was about to say. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you about your condition," she began, setting the clipboard aside. "The damage to your knee was catastrophic. We've managed to save the leg, but the joint itself—" She paused, searching for words that could somehow soften reality. The kneecap was completely shattered. Multiple fragments had to be removed. The ligaments, tendons, cartilage all severely compromised. Voss listened without expression, her face a mask of professional detachment. But inside, she felt something fundamental breaking apart, piece by piece, like her kneecap under the force of that explosion. "What's the prognosis, doctor?" Her voice was steady, clinical, the same tone she'd used to request mission parameters. Dr. Wells took a breath. "With extensive rehabilitation, you'll regain some mobility. You'll be able to walk with assistance crutches, possibly a walker for longer distances. But Sarah... She leaned forward, her voice gentling. You'll never run again. You'll never jump, climb, or perform any of the physical activities your career has required. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Voss stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in each square while her world reorganized itself around this new reality. The Navy SEALs demanded peak physical performance. A warrior who couldn't run, couldn't jump, couldn't keep pace with her team was no warrior at all. How long before I can return to duty? She asked, though they both knew the question was meaningless. Dr. Wells's silence was answer enough. 2 hours later, Commander Richard Hayes entered her room. Voss had served under Hayes for 3 years, respected him as both an officer and a leader. But the man who approached her bedside now wore the uncomfortable expression of someone delivering orders he didn't want to give. Sarah, he said, foregoing her rank, a small courtesy that somehow made everything worse. I'm sorry about what happened. The whole base is shaken up about this. She nodded, waiting for the real reason for his visit. Hayes pulled out a folder, its contents as inevitable as gravity. I have to inform you that you're being medically reassigned. Effective immediately. You're transferred to administrative duties pending full medical evaluation and rehabilitation. The words were bureaucratic, sanitized, but their meaning was crystal clear. Her career as a SEAL was over. The investigation into the explosion is ongoing, Hayes continued. Equipment malfunction is the preliminary finding, but we're looking into all possibilities. If someone was negligent, if there was any kind of sabotage, we'll find out. Voss met his eyes. And if you don't? Hayes shifted uncomfortably. Sarah, even if we prove this was sabotage, even if we find who's responsible... Your injuries are permanent. The medical board will never clear you for active duty. I'm sorry, but that's just reality. After he left, Voss stared out the window at the Oregon coast. In the distance, she could see Razor Point Naval Base, where her former team was probably running drills, preparing for missions she'd never be part of again. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could see her old life, but could never return to it. The first visitors came that afternoon. Morrison and Reeves appeared in her doorway, their faces creased with genuine concern and barely concealed anger. This is such bullshit, ma'am, Reeves said, his Nebraska accent thickening with emotion. The best team leader we've ever had, taken out by a goddamn equipment malfunction. Morrison was more controlled, but equally furious. The investigation team is asking a lot of questions about the basement setup. Something doesn't add up about that explosion. They talked for 20 minutes about the team, about missions, about everything except the obvious fact that her military career was finished. When they prepared to leave, Morrison hesitated at the door. Sarah, if this wasn't an accident, if someone did this to you, we'll find out. And when we do... He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Later that evening, Lynch and Nash arrived together. They moved with careful coordination, their expressions perfectly calibrated to show concern without revealing the satisfaction that burned beneath. Ma'am, the whole team is devastated about this, Lynch said, his voice heavy with manufactured sympathy. We keep replaying that training exercise, wondering if we could have done something different. Nash nodded gravely. We all know how much the teams mean to you. This has to be destroying you inside. Voss studied their faces, memorizing every micro-expression, every carefully chosen word. They thought they were in control, thought their plan had worked perfectly. A career-ending injury disguised as an accident, removing the competition while maintaining their own innocence. Thank you for coming, she said simply. It means a lot to know the team cares. But as they turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice carrying just enough edge to make them pause. You know what's interesting about explosions? They leave signatures, patterns, evidence of how they were created, where the charges were placed, What kind of expertise was required? She smiled slightly. The investigators are very thorough these days. Lynch's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nash's eyes flickered with something that might have been worry. But they maintained their facade, offering final words of support before disappearing into the corridor, alone again. Voss closed her eyes and let the full weight of her situation settle over her like a lead blanket. Her kneecap was destroyed. Her career was finished. Her own men had betrayed her. The life she'd built through years of sacrifice and dedication had been obliterated in a single moment of calculated treachery. But Lynch and Nash had made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed that breaking her body would break her spirit. They'd believed that ending her career would end her fight. They thought that a Navy SEAL who couldn't stand was no longer dangerous. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As the hospital settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Sarah Voss lay in the darkness and began to plan. Not for recovery, that was impossible. Not for revenge, that was beneath her. Instead, she began planning for something far more powerful: resurrection. Because sometimes the only way to prove you can't be broken is to rebuild yourself from the pieces. The war was far from over. It was just beginning. The investigation report arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a junior officer who couldn't meet Voss's eyes as he handed her the manila envelope. She'd been expecting it for 3 weeks, watching the calendar count down to the moment when the Navy would officially close the book on her destroyed career. Her hands remained steady as she broke the seal, though inside her chest something cold and sharp began to crystallize. The document was 12 pages of bureaucratic language, technical diagrams, and carefully worded conclusions that danced around the truth like shadows avoiding light. Equipment malfunction due to improper storage of training materials, she read aloud to the empty hospital room. No evidence of deliberate sabotage or negligence by personnel. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but it was page 8 that made her blood turn to ice. There, buried in the appendix of witness statements, she found what Lynch and Nash thought they'd hidden forever. During the initial interviews, Lynch had stated he'd checked the basement area approximately 30 minutes before the exercise began. Nash had corroborated this, claiming they'd done a routine safety sweep together. The problem was the timestamps. Security footage showed both men entering the basement facility at 0347 hours, merely 3 hours before they'd claimed, and 45 minutes before the official pre-exercise briefing. They'd lied about when they were there. They'd lied about why they were there. And the investigators had either missed it or chosen to ignore it. Voss set the report aside and reached for her phone, dialing a number she'd memorized years ago. Special Agent Diana Cross answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the same razor-sharp focus that had made her the Navy's most effective criminal investigator. Agent Cross, this is Lieutenant Sarah Voss. I need to discuss some inconsistencies in the report on my training accident. There was a pause. Lieutenant, that case has been closed. The findings were conclusive. The findings were incomplete. Voss kept her voice level, professional. I have evidence that suggests the investigation missed critical details. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves 2 members of my team lied about their whereabouts on the morning of the explosion. Another pause, longer this time. Lieutenant, I understand you're looking for answers, but sometimes accidents are just accidents. Conspiracy theories won't change what happened to your knee. The dismissal in Cross's voice was like a physical blow. Even the investigators who were supposed to seek truth had written her off as a broken soldier grasping for explanations that would make her injuries meaningful. The system she'd served faithfully for 8 years had decided her case wasn't worth pursuing. That afternoon brought another devastating revelation. Dr. Martinez, from the Naval Medical Review Board, arrived with a fresh clipboard and the kind of expression doctors wore when delivering terminal diagnoses. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Lieutenant Voss, I'm here to inform you that your medical review board has reached its final determination. Your injuries are classified as permanent and totally disabling for the purposes of active military service. You're being medically retired with full disability benefits. Effective immediately. She'd known this was coming, had prepared herself for the words. But hearing them spoken aloud felt like watching her own funeral. What about desk duty? Administrative roles? I'm still capable of. Dr. Martinez shook his head. The board's decision is final. Your mobility limitations make you unsuitable for any active military position. The Navy appreciates your service, but your career is concluded. After he left, Voss sat in the silence of her hospital room and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not grief, she'd moved past that weeks ago. Not anger, that was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she felt the cold, calculating focus that had made her an exceptional SEAL leader crystallizing into something harder and more dangerous. They thought they'd won. Lynch and Nash believed they'd eliminated their competition and escaped justice. The Navy had declared her case closed, her career finished, her fight over. Everyone from the investigators to the medical board to the officers who visited with their careful sympathy had written her off as another casualty of military service, but they'd all made the same mistake. They'd confused her body with her mind, her mobility with her capability, her career with her identity. They thought that destroying her knee had destroyed her power. The truth arrived that evening in an unmarked envelope slipped under her door by an orderly who disappeared before she could ask questions. Inside was a single photograph. Lynch and Nash entering the basement facility, timestamped 0347 hours. At the bottom, someone had written in precise handwriting, "Some of us remember what loyalty means. Morrison." It had to be. He'd been asking his own questions, conducting his own investigation while the official inquiry painted over the truth with bureaucratic whitewash. Someone else knew what had really happened in that basement, and they weren't willing to let it disappear. The next morning brought visitors she hadn't expected. 3 men in dress uniforms knocked on her door, their faces carrying the weight of uncomfortable duty. She recognized Captain James Fletcher, the base commanding officer, flanked by 2 officers she didn't know. "Lieutenant Voss," Fletcher began, his voice formal and distant. "We need to discuss your future with naval special warfare." She waited, knowing that whatever came next would be another blow disguised as professional courtesy. "Given your medical retirement and the circumstances surrounding your injury, we believe it would be best for all parties if you accepted a quiet transition out of service. No publicity, no interviews about the training accident. A clean separation that protects both your privacy and the Navy's interests." The message was crystal clear. Take your disability pension and disappear. Don't ask questions. Don't challenge the official narrative. Don't remind anyone that the Navy's elite units could destroy their own from within. "And if I refuse this generous offer?" she asked. Fletcher's expression hardened. "Lieutenant, you're no longer in a position to make demands. Your military career is over. Your influence is finished. The best thing you can do now is accept reality and move on with your civilian life." He set a folder on her bedside table. "Discharge papers. Sign them, and this all goes away quietly. Everyone moves on. Everyone wins." After they left, Voss opened the folder and stared at the documents that would officially end 8 years of service. 8 years of sacrifice. 8 years of believing that excellence and loyalty mattered more than politics and jealousy. All she had to do was sign her name, and the pressure would stop. The subtle threats would end. The investigation would stay buried. Lynch and Nash would face no consequences for their betrayal. But as she held the pen above the signature line, she thought about Morrison risking his career to slip her that photograph. She thought about every young woman who might follow her path, only to discover that their own teammates could be their greatest enemies. She thought about the oath she'd taken to defend against all enemies. Foreign and domestic. She set the pen aside without signing. They wanted her to disappear quietly. To accept that justice was a luxury she could no longer afford. They expected her to be grateful for the crumbs of a disability pension and the promise that her humiliation would remain private. They thought that a broken seal would choose the path of least resistance. They were about to learn that Lieutenant Sarah Voss had never chosen the easy path in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. The Navy had declared war on her the moment they decided to cover up the truth. They just didn't know it yet, because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one everyone has written off as defeated. The nights were the worst. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and dawn, when the hospital settled into its deepest quiet, and even the most dedicated nurses retreated to their stations, Sarah Voss discovered what true isolation felt like. The morphine drip helped with the physical pain, but nothing in the Navy's medical arsenal could touch the deeper wounds that Lynch and Nash had carved into her soul. She lay in bed 7, staring at ceiling tiles she'd memorized down to every water stain and hairline crack, listening to the mechanical symphony of her new existence. The 4 pumps' rhythmic clicking, the hiss of the ventilation system, the distant murmur of late-night conversations from the nurses' station. These sounds had become the soundtrack to her destroyed life, replacing the roar of helicopter rotors and the crisp commands that had once defined her days. The physical therapy began 3 weeks after the surgery. Angela Rodriguez, a former Army medic who'd lost her own leg to an IED in Kandahar, wheeled a contraption of pulleys and resistance bands into Voss's room with the kind of professional cheerfulness that masked deep understanding of what lay ahead. "Lieutenant, we're going to start slow," Rodriguez announced, positioning the equipment beside the bed. "Range of motion exercises first. The goal is to maintain as much flexibility as possible in the joint." The first attempt to bend her reconstructed knee sent lightning bolts of agony shooting up Voss's leg and into her spine. She bit down hard enough to taste blood, refusing to give voice to the scream that clawed at her throat. Rodriguez watched with clinical detachment, making notes on a clipboard. "Pain scale of 1 to 10? She asked. 4, Voss lied. Rodriguez's raised eyebrow indicated she knew better, but she didn't challenge the obvious deception. They both understood that admitting weakness wasn't an option, not for someone who'd built her identity on being stronger than everyone around her. Days blurred into weeks of incremental torture, disguised as rehabilitation. Every morning brought the same routine. Wake to fluorescent brightness. Endure the prodding of nurses checking surgical sites. Swallow pills that dulled the edges of reality. Then submit to Rodriguez's relentless optimism as she guided Voss through exercises that felt like elaborate forms of punishment. 30 degrees of flexion today, Rodriguez announced during week 4, measuring the pathetic angle at which Voss could bend her shattered joint. "That's progress. Progress." The word felt like mockery. 30 degrees of motion where she'd once had full range. A shuffling walk with a walker where she'd once run 5-minute miles. The ability to move from bed to bathroom where she'd once rappelled down cliffs and kicked down doors. But the physical limitations were nothing compared to the psychological warfare that began in earnest during her 6th week of hospitalization. It started with small things, visits from former teammates, that felt more like interrogations than social calls. "How are you holding up, ma'am?" Petty Officer 3rd Class Kevin Walsh asked during one such visit, his eyes scanning her chart with too much interest for casual concern. "Must be tough, being stuck in here while the rest of us are still operational." Walsh was new to the team, recruited after her injury, but something in his manner suggested his loyalty lay with Lynch and Nash rather than with Truth. His questions were too pointed, his interest in her medical prognosis too keen. She began to suspect that every visitor was reporting back to someone about her condition, her state of mind, her plans for the future. The psychological pressure intensified when Captain Fletcher returned with a new offer. This time he came alone, his uniform crisp and his expression carefully neutral as he positioned himself beside her bed. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our last conversation," he began, his tone suggesting fatherly concern rather than military authority. "I may have been too direct before. The Navy values your service, recognizes your sacrifice. That's why we're prepared to make this transition as comfortable as possible." He produced a new folder, this one thicker than the discharge papers. Enhanced disability rating. Full medical coverage for life. Preferential placement in federal civilian positions. Even a possible consulting role with Naval Special Warfare Advisory capacity, of course. The offer was generous enough to be insulting. They were essentially trying to buy her silence with benefits and the promise of remaining connected to the world that had cast her out. Fletcher waited while she reviewed the documents, his expression patient but expectant. "This is contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement," she observed, reading the fine print. "No interviews, no books, no public discussion of my military service or the circumstances of my medical retirement." "Standard protocol for sensitive positions," Fletcher replied smoothly. "The Navy has legitimate interests in protecting operational security and maintaining public confidence in our training programs." What he didn't say, what they both understood, was that the Navy's primary interest lay in ensuring that no one ever learned how thoroughly they'd failed one of their own. They wanted her complicity in the cover-up, purchased with the promise of financial security and the illusion of continued relevance. The visits from Lynch and Nash became more frequent as her discharge date approached. They arrived separately now, having apparently decided that coordinated appearances might seem suspicious. Lynch usually came during evening hours, when the corridors were quieter and conversations less likely to be overheard. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about that day," he said during one such visit, settling into the chair beside her bed with studied casualness. "The explosion, I mean. Sometimes I wonder if we missed something during our security sweep. If there was some sign we should have caught." His words were carefully chosen, designed to sound like genuine concern while subtly reinforcing the official narrative. He was there to ensure she understood that her version of events, her suspicions about sabotage, would never be believed over the word of two decorated SEALs with unblemished records. Nash's approach was different, but equally insidious. He focused on her isolation, her dependence on others, the stark reality of her diminished circumstances. "It's got to be killing you, being stuck in here while the world moves on without you," he observed during one visit, his tone carrying just enough sympathy to mask the cruelty underneath. "Must be hard to accept that all those years of training, all that sacrifice, led to this." They were systematically dismantling her psychologically, using the tools of emotional warfare to ensure she understood her powerlessness. Every conversation was a reminder that they had won, that justice was a luxury she could no longer afford, that her best option was to accept defeat gracefully and disappear into civilian obscurity. But what Lynch and Nash failed to understand was that their visits were providing Voss with something more valuable than medical treatment or physical therapy: intelligence. Each conversation revealed more about their mindset, their fears, their assumptions about her capabilities. They were so focused on ensuring her silence that they failed to notice she was studying them with the same intensity she'd once applied to enemy targets. Late at night, when the hospital settled into its deepest quiet, Voss lay awake cataloging everything she'd learned. Lynch's tendency to over-explain when nervous, Nash's habit of touching his watch when lying, the way both men avoided direct eye contact when discussing the explosion, the subtle coordination of their visits, designed to maintain psychological pressure without appearing coordinated. They thought they were dealing with a broken soldier, desperate for validation and security. They had no idea they were providing intelligence to someone who was already planning her next operation, not from a hospital bed, but from a position they'd never see coming, because Lieutenant Sarah Voss was discovering something that would have terrified them if they'd understood it. Being written off as powerless was the most dangerous kind of camouflage. When everyone believes you're defeated, you become invisible. And invisible enemies are the deadliest kind. The war wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. And this time, she would be fighting on her terms. The discharge came on a gray October morning, 3 months after the explosion that had shattered more than just bone and cartilage. Sarah Voss signed the final paperwork with a steady hand while Rodriguez packed the last of her belongings into a standard-issue duffel bag. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was leaving the Navy with the same bag she'd carried into boot camp 8 years earlier, as if her entire military career had been nothing more than an elaborate circle. "You've got my number," Rodriguez said, handing over a business card for a private physical therapy clinic in Portland. "The VA will cover 20 sessions, but if you need more ... She left the offer hanging, both women understanding that Voss's recovery would be measured in years, not months. The taxi ride to her new apartment took 40 minutes through rain-slicked streets that seemed designed to reflect her mood. The Navy had arranged temporary housing in a subsidized complex for disabled veterans, a sterile collection of identical units where former warriors went to disappear quietly into civilian anonymity. Building C, Unit 247, 3rd floor, accessible by elevator, walking distance to medical facilities and grocery stores. Everything calculated for maximum convenience and minimum dignity. The apartment was exactly what she'd expected. Beige walls, government-issued furniture, windows that looked out onto a parking lot where other forgotten soldiers shuffled between their cars and their mailboxes. Home sweet home for the discarded, but appearances, as any SEAL knew, could be deceiving. That first night, after the building settled into sleep and the sounds of urban life faded to distant whispers, Voss began her real work. She started with the apartment itself, methodically examining every corner, every surface, every potential vulnerability. The walls were thin enough to hear conversations through. The locks were standard residential grade. The windows offered clear sight lines to the street below. It wasn't a fortress, but it would do for what she had planned. From a hidden pocket in her duffel bag, she withdrew items that Rodriguez and the discharge team had never seen. Morrison's photograph of Lynch and Nash entering the basement facility, printed copies of the security footage timestamp she'd memorized, and a small notebook filled with observations from her hospital stay. The real evidence, carefully preserved and documented, but physical evidence was only half the battle. What she needed now was capability. The transformation began before dawn on her second day of civilian life. While her neighbors slept off their various medications and disappointments, Voss lowered herself onto the apartment's thin carpet and began to crawl. Not the desperate, pain-racked crawling of her hospital escape attempts, but controlled, methodical movement, designed to rebuild the foundation of her strength. Her right leg was a liability. Now the shattered knee could bear some weight but would never again provide the explosive power she'd once relied upon. So she learned to move differently, using her arms and core to generate momentum, her left leg to provide stability, her right leg only for balance and steering. It was clumsy at first, inefficient, but it was movement under her own power. Each night brought new challenges she set for herself. Crawling the length of the apartment without stopping, navigating around obstacles she placed in her path, moving silently across different surfaces, carpet, hardwood, tile, learning how each material affected her approach. The old Sarah Voss had been built for speed and vertical assault. The new version would be designed for stealth and horizontal warfare. By her third week in the apartment, she'd established a routine that would have impressed her old drill instructors. 500 hours, crawling exercises and core strengthening. 600 hours, upper body resistance training using improvised equipment, water jugs, resistance bands, her own body weight. 700 hours, intelligence gathering. The intelligence phase was perhaps the most crucial element of her preparation. Using a secure laptop purchased with cash, she began researching Lynch and Nash with the thoroughness of a military operation. Service records, training histories, personal backgrounds, financial situations, social media presence, everything that might reveal vulnerabilities or patterns. Lynch, she discovered, had gambling debts that exceeded his military salary. His ex-wife had filed multiple complaints about missed child support payments. His social media showed a man trying to project success, while clearly struggling with basic financial responsibilities. A man who might be motivated by jealousy of his superior's rapid advancement and the opportunities that came with it. Nash presented a different profile, technically competent, but ambitious beyond his abilities. Passed over for promotion twice in the past 3 years. Vocal in private conversations about the Navy's diversity initiatives and their impact on qualified personnel. A man who saw her success as a personal insult to his own adequacy. Together, they formed a perfect storm of resentment and opportunity. Two soldiers who decided that destroying a superior officer was preferable to matching her performance, but information was useless without the means to act on it. Which brought Voss to the most challenging aspect of her transformation, learning to fight from a position everyone assumed was defenseless. The breakthrough came during her 4th week, when she accidentally knocked over a lamp while navigating around her coffee table in the dark. Instead of cursing her clumsiness, she found herself analyzing the physics of what had happened, how her movement had generated unexpected leverage, how her low position had created an advantage in applying force from an angle no one would anticipate. That night, she began experimenting with combat applications of her new mobility. How to strike from a crawling position. How to use her modified movement to create surprise attacks. How to turn her apparent vulnerability into tactical advantage. The techniques were unlike anything taught in SEAL training. Born from necessity and refined through countless hours of painful practice. She discovered that fighting from the ground offered unique benefits, a lower center of gravity that was harder to destabilize, unexpected angles of attack that opponents wouldn't train to defend against, the element of surprise that came from an adversary who fought unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Lynch and Nash had created something they couldn't possibly have anticipated: a warrior who'd been forced to evolve beyond their understanding. The physical preparation was exhausting but manageable. The psychological preparation proved more challenging. Every day brought reminders of what she'd lost: news reports about SEAL operations she would never participate in, emails from former teammates who'd moved on to new assignments, government correspondence addressed to Ms. Voss instead of Lieutenant Voss. The world had decided she was no longer a warrior. And some days the weight of that dismissal threatened to crush her resolve. But those were the moments when she remembered Lynch's smug satisfaction as he'd watched her loaded into the ambulance, Nash's carefully performed concern as he'd visited her hospital bed, Fletcher's assumption that a pension and medical benefits would purchase her silence, the system's collective decision that her truth was less important than their convenience. Those memories became fuel for the fire that burned in her chest. The cold anger that drove her through pain and exhaustion and the crushing loneliness of her new existence. They thought they'd broken her. They thought they'd won. They had no idea that they'd simply forced her to become something more dangerous than she'd ever been as a conventional soldier. Because when you take away someone's ability to fight standing up, you force them to learn how to fight from positions you never thought to defend against. The apartment in Building C, Unit 247, had become a training facility unlike any in the Navy's inventory. And the weapon being forged, there was unlike anything Lynch and Nash had ever faced. Their reckoning was coming. They just didn't know it yet. The letter arrived 6 months after her discharge, delivered by certified mail on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other until she opened the official Navy envelope. Inside, printed on letterhead from Naval Special Warfare Command, was an invitation that made her blood run cold and her heart race. Simultaneously, the annual Special Warfare Memorial Challenge cordially invites all former and current SEAL personnel to participate in this year's Tactical Endurance Competition. This event honors our fallen brothers and sisters while demonstrating the continued excellence of naval special warfare. The challenge was legendary among SEALs, a grueling test that combined every aspect of their training into a single, brutal competition. Obstacle courses, underwater navigation, long-range marksmanship, tactical problem-solving under extreme stress. It was the kind of event that separated the elite from the merely excellent, where careers were made and legends were born. More importantly, it was where Lynch and Nash would be competing. She'd been monitoring their activities through careful research and discreet inquiries. Both men had been promoted in the months since her discharge, Lynch to Petty Officer Second Class, Nash to a specialized training position at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Their careers were flourishing while hers lay in ruins, a fact they probably celebrated privately while maintaining public expressions of sympathy for their injured teammate. The invitation was meant as a courtesy, she realized, a gesture to include disabled veterans in the ceremony, without any expectation that they would actually compete. The small print made it clear: modified participation available for personnel with physical limitations. They expected her to attend as a spectator, to sit in the stands and watch while her former peers demonstrated the capabilities she'd lost. But what the invitation's authors didn't understand was that they'd just provided her with the perfect battlefield. The next morning, she called the number listed for registration. Commander Patricia Stone answered with crisp professionalism, her tone shifting to careful sympathy when Voss identified herself. "Ms. Voss, how wonderful to hear from you. I'm sure you're interested in attending the memorial ceremony. We'll have reserved seating for disabled veterans, and I want to compete." Voss interrupted. Silence stretched across the phone line. When Stone finally spoke, her voice carried the gentle condescension reserved for people who clearly didn't understand their limitations. "Sarah, I appreciate your spirit, but the competition is designed for active duty personnel. The physical requirements are substantial. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable participating in the memorial service instead. Is there anything in the regulations that specifically prohibits disabled veterans from competing?" Another pause. "Well, no. But the medical clearance requirements. I have medical clearance for physical activity. Dr. Rodriguez at the VA can provide documentation." Stone's discomfort was audible. "Sarah, even if you're medically cleared, the competition includes rope climbing, underwater navigation, a 10-mile run. These aren't activities that someone with your injuries could realistically." "Commander," Voss said, her voice carrying the authority she'd once wielded as a team leader, "I'm not asking for modified rules or special accommodations. I'm asking to compete under the same standards as everyone else. If I fail to complete an event, I'm eliminated. Simple as that." What she didn't tell Stone was that failure wasn't an option. She'd been training for this moment since her first night in the apartment, designing her preparation around the specific challenges she'd face at the competition. Every crawling exercise had been calculated to build the core strength needed for rope climbing. Every upper body workout had been focused on the grip endurance required for prolonged suspension. Every breathing exercise had been designed to maximize lung capacity for underwater events. The 10-mile run would be impossible for her legs. But there were no rules stating that participants had to run upright. Registration confirmed. She had 6 weeks to finalize her preparation. The competition would take place at Camp Pendleton, where hundreds of SEALs would gather to test themselves against the most challenging course in naval special warfare. Lynch and Nash would be there, expecting to compete against their peers while their victim watched helplessly from the sidelines. Instead, they were about to face something they'd never prepared for, the woman they'd tried to destroy. Armed with capabilities they couldn't imagine and motivated by justice they'd never comprehend, the flight to San Diego was her first time on an airplane since her discharge. She'd purchased a seat in the back row, away from other passengers who might recognize her or ask uncomfortable questions about her crutches and leg braces. The 3-hour journey gave her time to review her final preparations and visualize the competition. Ahead, she'd studied video footage of previous year's challenges, memorizing every obstacle, every transition, every potential advantage her unique approach might provide. The course designers expected participants to tackle challenges in conventional ways: running, jumping, climbing with legs and arms working in traditional coordination. They'd never considered how someone might navigate the same obstacles using modified techniques born from necessity and refined through months of obsessive. That night, she began experimenting with combat applications of her new mobility. How to strike from a crawling position. How to use her modified movement to create surprise attacks. How to turn her apparent vulnerability into tactical advantage. The techniques were unlike anything taught in SEAL training. Born from necessity and refined through countless hours of painful practice. She discovered that fighting from the ground offered unique benefits: a lower center of gravity that was harder to destabilize, unexpected angles of attack that opponents wouldn't train to defend against, the element of surprise that came from an adversary who fought unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Lynch and Nash had created something they couldn't possibly have anticipated: a warrior who'd been forced to evolve beyond their understanding. The physical preparation was exhausting but manageable. The psychological preparation proved more challenging. Every day brought reminders of what she'd lost: news reports about SEAL operations she would never participate in, emails from former teammates who'd moved on to new assignments, government correspondence addressed to Ms. Voss instead of Lieutenant Voss. They're competing tomorrow? She asked casually. Wouldn't miss it. Lynch especially, he's been training hard, talking about proving himself worthy of permanent leadership. Thinks a strong showing here will cement his position. After Morrison left, she sat alone in the hotel restaurant and watched groups of SEALs planning their strategies for the next day's competition. Young warriors full of confidence and camaraderie, secure in their brotherhood and their capabilities. She remembered being like them once, before she'd learned that the greatest threats sometimes came from within the ranks. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Lynch and Nash would discover that their victim hadn't disappeared quietly into civilian obscurity. Tomorrow, they would face the consequences of their betrayal in front of hundreds of their peers, under conditions they couldn't control or manipulate. But most importantly, tomorrow the Navy would learn what happened when they wrote off someone who refused to accept defeat. Because Lieutenant Sarah Voss was about to remind everyone what it meant to be a SEAL, not despite her injuries, but because of how she'd transformed them into weapons. The competition would begin at 06:00 hours. She spent her final evening in preparation, not reviewing tactics or visualizing success, but in quiet meditation about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the basement explosion that had shattered her knee to the hospital bed where she'd planned her comeback. From the lonely apartment where she'd rebuilt herself to this hotel room where she prepared for vindication. Tomorrow, the world would see what Lynch and Nash had created when they'd tried to break a Navy SEAL. They were about to learn that some people don't stay down, no matter how hard you hit them. And sometimes they come back stronger than anyone thought possible. The dawn air at Camp Pendleton carried the salt tang of the Pacific and the tension of 300 elite warriors preparing for battle. Sarah Voss arrived at the competition staging area at 0530 hours, 30 minutes before the official start time, wheeling herself in a standard-issue wheelchair to the registration checkpoint. The sight of her drew stares and whispered conversations from clusters of SEALs stretching and checking their gear. "Ma'am, you're here for the memorial ceremony?" asked Petty Officer Collins, a young admin specialist manning the registration table. His tone was respectful, but confused disabled veterans weren't expected at the competitor check-in. "Competitor registration," Voss replied, handing over her paperwork. Sarah Voss, bib number 247. Collins's eyes widened as he processed the information. Around them, conversations gradually quieted as word spread through the crowd. The former team leader who'd been destroyed by a training accident was here, not as a spectator, but as a participant in the most grueling competition in naval special warfare. Lynch appeared at the edge of her vision, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Nash stood beside him, both men wearing the kind of frozen expressions that came from seeing a ghost they'd thought was safely buried. They approached slowly, their body language a careful balance of public concern and private alarm. "Sarah," Lynch said, his voice carrying manufactured warmth. "This is unexpected. Are you sure you're ready for something this demanding?" The question was loaded with implications, concern for her safety, doubt about her capabilities, and beneath it all, the barely concealed hope that she would recognize her limitations and withdraw before embarrassing herself publicly. "I appreciate your concern," she replied evenly. "But I'm here to compete, same as everyone else." Nash stepped forward, his expression shifting to what he probably thought looked like protective loyalty. "Ma'am, no one would think less of you if you decided to observe instead. The course is brutal, even for fully capable personnel. With your injuries." He let the sentence hang, allowing the implications to settle over the growing crowd of onlookers. Here was her former corpsman, publicly highlighting her disabilities while pretending to offer support. The message was clear. She didn't belong here, couldn't possibly succeed. Should accept defeat gracefully before humiliating herself. "Thank you for the medical assessment." "Nash," she said, her voice carrying just enough edge to remind him of their former ranks. "I'll be sure to let you know if I need another opinion." The competition briefing began at 0600 sharp, delivered by Command Master Chief Rodriguez, a legend, whose reputation for creating impossible challenges was matched only by his fairness in judging them. He stood before the assembled competitors like a granite monument, his voice carrying across the staging area with crisp authority. "Gentlemen." "Lady," he began, nodding toward the 3 women among the competitors, including Voss. "Today's challenge consists of 5 events, each designed to test the complete range of SEAL capabilities. Rope climb to 40 feet. Underwater navigation through a 100-meter obstacle course. 10-mile tactical movement with full gear. Marksmanship under stress. Final obstacle course, including wall climb, crawl space, and precision tasks." He paused, letting the scope of the challenge sink in. "Failure to complete any event means elimination. No exceptions. No modifications. You succeed according to SEAL standards, or you don't succeed at all." Around her, competitors nodded grimly. This was what they'd trained for, what they lived for, the chance to prove themselves against standards that separated the elite from everyone else. But their glances kept drifting toward Voss, wondering how someone in a wheelchair could possibly tackle challenges designed for peak physical specimens. They were about to find out. The first event began with the rope climb, a 40-foot ascent up a thick manila rope suspended from a steel tower. Competitors would climb in groups of 10, timed to the second, with failure defined as touching the ground before reaching the bell at the top. It was a test of grip strength, core power, and pure determination. Voss waited until Lynch and Nash were in the first group, watching from her wheelchair as they scaled the rope with fluid efficiency. Lynch reached the top in 43 seconds, Nash in 47. Both men rang the bell with obvious satisfaction before rappelling down to join the crowd of successful climbers. When her group was called, she wheeled to the base of the rope and transferred herself from the chair to the ground. The crowd's murmur shifted from curiosity to uncomfortable silence as she positioned herself beneath the thick manila line. Master Chief Rodriguez approached, his expression neutral, but his voice carrying genuine concern. "Voss, you sure about this?" No shame in recognizing limitations. She looked up at the rope stretching 40 feet above her, then at the faces surrounding the base of the tower. Hundreds of SEALs watched, some with pity, others with skepticism, all of them certain they were about to witness a career-ending humiliation. Lynch and Nash stood among them, their expressions carefully controlled, but their eyes bright with anticipation. "I'm sure. Master Chief." She gripped the rope with both hands and began to climb. What happened next silenced every voice at the base of that tower. Instead of the traditional hand-over-hand technique that relied on leg strength for support, Voss ascended using a method born from months of desperate innovation. Her arms pulled with mechanical precision, while her core muscles provided the power that her legs could no longer deliver. Each movement was calculated, efficient, drawing on strength she'd built through endless hours of crawling and resistance training. Her destroyed me couldn't provide push-off power, but it could lock against the rope for stability. Her left leg wrapped around the manila line, creating a fulcrum that allowed her upper body to generate upward momentum. It was unlike anything the crowd had ever seen, not traditional rope climbing, but something new, something evolved from necessity and refined through obsessive practice. 20 feet. 30 feet. The crowd below had gone completely silent, watching something they couldn't categorize or understand. This wasn't inspiration porn or feel-good symbolism. This was a demonstration of capability that redefined their understanding of what was possible. At 35 feet, her grip began to falter. The accumulated fatigue of supporting her entire body weight through arm strength alone was taking its toll. Below, she could see Lynch's face, no longer masked with false concern, but openly willing her to fail. Nash stood beside him, both men counting on gravity and muscle fatigue to end this embarrassing display. But Sarah Voss had been falling for 6 months in her hospital bed. In her apartment, in the eyes of everyone who'd written her off as finished. She was tired of falling. At 38 feet, with her arms screaming and her grip failing, she found one last reserve of strength born not from muscle fiber, but from pure, crystallized rage. The bell rang clear and sharp across Camp Pendleton as her hand struck it at the 40-foot mark. The timer showed 1 minute, 12 seconds slower than Lynch and Nash, but well within the passing standard. More importantly, it was impossible according to every assumption about what her injuries allowed. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of her controlled descent and the whisper of rope through her hands. When her feet touched the ground, the crowd remained frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Master Chief Rodriguez approached with an expression she couldn't read. For a moment, she wondered if he'd found some technical violation, some excuse to disqualify her performance. Instead, he handed her a water bottle and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. 40 years in the teams, and I've never seen anything like that. Whatever they did to you, Voss, they created something they weren't prepared to deal with. As she wheeled toward the next event, she caught Lynch and Nash exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Their victim wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be capable of this. She was supposed to be broken, finished, safely buried in civilian obscurity. Instead, she just proved that their attempt to destroy her had forged something they'd never encountered before. A SEAL who'd been forced to evolve beyond their understanding of what was possible. 4 events remained. And with each one, Lynch and Nash were about to discover that their greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating her recovery, it had been underestimating her capacity for evolution. The underwater navigation event began 2 hours after the rope climb, giving competitors time to recover while course officials prepared the 100-meter obstacle course submerged in Camp Pendleton's training pool. Sarah Voss sat in her wheelchair at poolside, watching technicians make final adjustments to the underwater maze of barriers, tunnels, and precision tasks that would test breath control, spatial awareness, and problem-solving under the ultimate stress of oxygen deprivation. Around the pool deck, competitors stretched and practiced breathing exercises, preparing their bodies for the sustained underwater effort ahead. The event required navigating through a series of submerged obstacles while completing specific tasks, retrieving numbered tokens from boxes, threading lines through predetermined routes, solving mechanical puzzles, all while holding a single breath for what typically stretched beyond 3 minutes. Lynch emerged from the equipment shed wearing his diving mask and fins, his confidence restored after watching several competitors fail the rope climb. The underwater event was his specialty. He'd set base records for breath holding during training, possessed the kind of lung capacity and underwater grace that made him nearly dolphin-like in aquatic environments. This would be where he separated himself from the field, where his natural advantages would overcome any concerns about Voss's unexpected rope climbing success. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her position near the pool edge. "This event's going to be particularly challenging for someone with limited mobility. The underwater obstacles require a lot of leg movement, precise fin control. Maybe you should consider—" "Save it, Lynch," she interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that made several nearby competitors turn their heads. "I didn't come this far to quit because you're worried about my swimming technique." Nash joined them, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language radiating the confidence of someone who knew they held decisive advantages. "Sarah, we're not trying to discourage you. We just know how demanding this event is. The course record is 3 minutes 47 seconds. Most competitors struggle to finish under 5 minutes. With your limitations," he gestured vaguely toward her legs, letting the implication hang in the salt-scented air. The message was clear. This was where reality would finally reassert itself, where the inspiring rope climb would be revealed as a fluke, where she would face the hard truth of her physical limitations. What neither man understood was that they'd just identified exactly the event where her months of preparation would prove most decisive. Master Chief Rodriguez called the first group to the starting blocks, 10 competitors who would attempt the course simultaneously, their times recorded by underwater cameras and surface observers. Lynch was in this group, moving with fluid confidence as he positioned himself at lane 7, the same lane where he'd set his previous records. At the starting signal, 10 bodies knifed into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. Above, observers tracked their progress through the clear water as they navigated the maze of obstacles below. Lynch moved like liquid mercury, his powerful kicks propelling him through the course with mechanical precision. Nash timed him from poolside, calling out split times that confirmed he was ahead of pace for a record-breaking performance. 3 minutes. 12 seconds later, Lynch surfaced at the far end of the pool, having completed the course with textbook efficiency. His token collection was perfect, his mechanical puzzles solved correctly, his time fast enough to lead the entire field. As he hauled himself onto the pool deck, water streaming from his gear, his expression carried the satisfaction of someone who just proved his superiority in the most definitive way possible. 3:08, announced the timekeeper. New course record. The crowd's applause was genuine. They just witnessed exceptional performance under extreme conditions. Lynch accepted congratulations with modest professionalism, but his eyes kept drifting toward Voss as she prepared for her own attempt in the next group. When her turn came, She transferred from wheelchair to pool deck and began the process of donning her equipment. The diving mask fit normally, but the fins required modification. Her right leg's limited flexibility meant the standard fin couldn't be secured properly. Instead, she'd brought a specially designed fin that accommodated her knees' restricted range of motion, along with additional equipment that drew curious stares from officials and competitors. "Ma'am, what's that?" asked the equipment inspector, pointing to the unusual device she'd attached to her weight belt. "Underwater propulsion unit," she replied. "Commercially available, battery-powered. Completely within competition regulations." The inspector consulted his rulebook, confirming that while unusual, the device didn't violate any specific prohibitions. It was essentially an underwater scooter, designed for recreational divers who wanted assistance with propulsion. In the context of a SEAL competition, it seemed like an admission of weakness, a technological crutch for someone who couldn't generate adequate thrust through her own swimming ability. Lynch watched from poolside, his earlier concern replaced by something approaching amusement. She was about to embarrass herself with gadgets and modifications, proving that all her preparation couldn't overcome fundamental physical limitations. The inspirational rope climb would be forgotten in the face of her inevitable failure in the water. At the starting signal, Voss entered the water with far less grace than the other competitors in her group. Her entry was controlled but awkward, her modified fins creating drag rather than thrust. For the first 30 seconds, as she descended toward the obstacle course, it appeared that Lynch's assessment was correct. She was struggling where others moved with natural efficiency. But as she reached the first obstacle, something remarkable happened. The underwater propulsion unit, rather than serving as a crutch, became an extension of her tactical thinking. While other competitors used their legs for propulsion and their hands for navigation, Voss had reversed the equation. The device provided forward momentum while her arms became precision instruments for obstacle manipulation. The result was unlike anything the underwater cameras had ever recorded. She moved through the course like a surgical instrument, every motion calculated for maximum efficiency rather than raw speed. Where other competitors had to slow down to complete precision tasks, she maintained steady forward progress while her hands worked independently of her movement. The device gave her the stability to solve mechanical puzzles that typically required competitors to brace themselves against obstacles. At the 2-minute mark, she was ahead of the projected pace for Lynch's record. At 3 minutes, she was moving through sections of the course faster than anyone had thought possible. Her token collection was flawless, her puzzle solutions executed with mechanical precision, her navigation through tight spaces accomplished without the leg positioning that typically slowed competitors. When she surfaced at 3 minutes, 4 seconds faster than Lynch's brand new record, the silence around the pool was absolute. Officials checked and rechecked the timing equipment, looking for errors that could explain what they'd just witnessed. Competitors stared at the scoreboard, trying to process how someone with destroyed knees had just swum faster than the man who held every underwater record at the base. "Master," Chief Rodriguez approached the pool edge where Voss treaded water, his expression unreadable. "Voss, that was ... He paused, searching for words that could encompass what the crowd had witnessed. "That was the most innovative tactical adaptation I've seen in 30 years of competition." As she climbed out of the pool, Lynch and Nash stood frozen at the deck's edge. Their expressions had shifted from confident superiority to something approaching panic. The woman they'd tried to destroy had just broken records using methods they'd never imagined, capabilities they'd never considered possible. But more than that, she'd done it in front of 300 SEALs, who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented, not inspiration, not sympathy, but the evolution of their profession in real time. Lynch's underwater record had stood for 3 years. It had taken Voss 3 minutes and 4 seconds to shatter it using techniques born from necessity and refined through obsessive preparation. as she toweled off and prepared for the next event. Both men realized that their victim had become something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The explosion they'd set in that basement hadn't destroyed her. It had forced her to become something entirely new, and they were only halfway through the competition. The final obstacle course stretched before the remaining competitors, like a gauntlet designed by someone who understood that true victory required more than physical capability. It demanded the fusion of mind, body, and unbreakable will. After 4 grueling events that had eliminated 2/3 of the field, only 37 SEALs remained, qualified to attempt the culminating challenge that would separate legends from merely exceptional warriors. Sarah Voss sat in her wheelchair at the starting line, her breathing controlled and her heart rate steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The course was a masterpiece of tactical engineering, a 12-foot wall that required rope climbing techniques, a 30-meter crawl space barely wide enough for shoulders, precision marksmanship stations under physical duress, and a final tower climb that tested every remaining reserve of strength and determination. Lynch and Nash stood among the surviving competitors, their earlier confidence replaced by something approaching desperation. Voss had not only survived the 10-mile movement event, completing it in a modified wheelchair designed for rough terrain, but had done so with a time that placed her in the top 15. Their plan to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly, and now they faced the terrifying possibility that she might actually complete the entire competition. Master Chief Rodriguez addressed the final group with the gravity befitting the moment. This obstacle course has broken warriors who thought they'd seen everything. It will test capabilities you didn't know you possessed and reveal weaknesses you never knew you had. Completion time is secondary to completion itself. Finishing this course puts you among the elite of the elite. He paused, his gaze sweeping across faces that showed exhaustion, determination, and in some cases, fear. There are no participation trophies here. You succeed according to SEAL standards, or you don't succeed at all. The first wave of competitors attacked the course with the kind of controlled aggression that defined naval special warfare. Lynch moved with fluid efficiency, his earlier records having restored some of his confidence. He scaled the wall in 43 seconds, disappeared into the crawl space with practiced grace, and emerged at the marksmanship station, ready to prove that his skills remained superior to those of his former team leader. His shooting was textbook perfect, 5 rounds through a target the size of a playing card at 50 meters, accomplished while maintaining an elevated heart rate from the preceding obstacles. The precision tower climb followed, a vertical maze that required rope work, balance beam navigation, and problem-solving under extreme physical stress. Lynch completed the entire course in 14 minutes. 37 seconds, a time that would have been respectable in any previous year's competition. Nash followed with a performance that was technically sound but lacked the fluid grace of elite-level execution. His time of 16 minutes, 12 seconds placed him respectably in the middle of successful finishers. Good enough to maintain his standing, but insufficient to distinguish himself among his peers. When Voss's turn came, she transferred from wheelchair to the ground at the base of the 12-foot wall. The crowd had grown throughout the day, word of her unprecedented performance spreading throughout Camp Pendleton, until hundreds of spectators lined the course perimeter. They watched in absolute silence as she approached the first obstacle, using techniques that defied every assumption about how such challenges could be conquered. Wall climb should have been impossible for someone with her injuries. Traditional approaches required explosive leg strength to maintain momentum while hands gripped and pulled. Instead, Voss employed a technique she'd perfected during her months of apartment training, using her arms and core to generate upward movement while her modified leg positioning provided stability rather than thrust. The Result was unlike anything the observers had ever witnessed. She ascended the wall with mechanical precision, each movement calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum energy expenditure. Where other competitors relied on speed and power, she demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that transformed obstacles into puzzles to be solved rather than barriers to be overcome. 12 minutes. When she surfaced at 3 minutes, 4 seconds faster than Lynch's brand new record, the silence around the pool was absolute. Officials checked and rechecked the timing equipment, looking for errors that could explain what they just witnessed. Competitors stared at the scoreboard, trying to process how someone with destroyed knees had just swum faster than the man who held every underwater record at the base. Master, Chief Rodriguez approached the pool edge where Voss treaded water, his expression unreadable. Voss, that was ... He paused, searching for words that could encompass what the crowd had witnessed. That was the most innovative tactical adaptation I've seen in 30 years of competition. As she climbed out of the pool, Lynch and Nash stood frozen at the deck's edge. Their expressions had shifted from confident superiority to something approaching panic. The woman they'd tried to destroy had just broken records using methods they'd never imagined. Capabilities they'd never considered possible, but more than that. She'd done it in front of 300 SEALs, who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented, not inspiration, not sympathy, but the evolution of their profession in real time. Lynch's underwater record had stood for 3 years. It had taken Voss 3 minutes and 4 seconds to shatter it using techniques born from necessity and refined through obsessive preparation. As she toweled off and prepared for the next event, both men realized that their victim had become something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The explosion they'd set in that basement hadn't destroyed her. It had forced her to become something entirely new, and they were only halfway through the competition. The final obstacle course stretched before the remaining competitors, like a gauntlet designed by someone who understood that true victory required more than physical capability. It demanded the fusion of mind, body, and unbreakable will. After 4 grueling events that had eliminated 2/3 of the field, only 37 SEALs remained, qualified to attempt the culminating challenge that would separate legends from merely exceptional warriors. Sarah Voss sat in her wheelchair at the starting line, her breathing controlled and her heart rate steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The course was a masterpiece of tactical engineering, a 12-foot wall that required rope climbing techniques, a 30-meter crawl space barely wide enough for shoulders, precision marksmanship stations under. Halfway up the tower, she passed the point where several competitors had failed throughout the day. Her modified techniques were proving not just adequate, but superior to conventional approaches. The crowd below watched something unprecedented, not inspiration or sympathy, but the demonstration that evolution under pressure could create capabilities that surpassed traditional methods. At the tower's peak, she completed the final precision task, threading a steel cable through a series of guides while maintaining her position 40 feet above the ground. Her hands moved with surgeon-like steadiness despite the accumulated fatigue of the entire competition. The descent was controlled and efficient, bringing her back to ground level where Master Chief Rodriguez waited with a stopwatch and an expression she couldn't read. Around the course perimeter, 300 SEALs stood in absolute silence, trying to process what they just witnessed. 30 minutes 41 seconds, Rodriguez announced. His voice carried across the silent crowd like a revelation. New course record. The implications hit the assembled warriors like a physical blow. The woman they'd assumed was finished, the competitor they'd expected to fail spectacularly, had not only completed the most demanding course in naval special warfare, she'd done it faster than anyone in the competition's history. But the real victory wasn't captured in the time or the record. It was written in the faces of Lynch and Nash as they realized that their attempt to destroy her had created something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Their victim had become living proof that some people don't just survive betrayal, they use it as fuel for transformation that transcends every limitation their enemies thought they'd imposed. Master Chief Rodriguez approached her with the kind of respect reserved for warriors who'd proven themselves under impossible conditions. Voss, in 30 years of running these competitions, I've never seen anything like what you just demonstrated. You've redefined what we consider possible. As the crowd finally found its voice and erupted in applause that echoed across Camp Pendleton, Sarah Voss understood that she'd accomplished something more significant than winning a competition. She'd proven that Lynch and Nash's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating her recovery, that had been believing that breaking her body would break her spirit. Instead, they'd forced her to discover that some people don't just refuse to stay down. They rise in ways that make their enemies wish they'd never tried to knock them down in the first place. The war was over. Justice had taken a form neither Lynch nor Nash had seen coming. And Lieutenant Sarah Voss had proven that sometimes the most devastating victory is simply refusing to accept defeat. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.